Hello, and welcome to Save Our Heritage Organization's tutorial video for restoring wood windows. This video will give a full overview of how to restore your wood windows from their current condition to beautiful and functional once again. Wood windows with original materials are one of the greatest assets of any historic home. Not only do they contribute to the character and charm of your home, but wood windows are also extremely functional, repairable, and can last over 100 years if properly maintained. The windows I will be working on in this video are from 1905. In addition, choosing to retain and restore wood windows helps protect the environment by preserving original, sustainable materials. Maintaining wood windows prevents the costly, expensive new windows made from non-sustainable materials and keeps waste out of the landfill, as new windows will inevitably require replacement in as little as 10 years. While restoring wood windows may seem like a daunting task, it is a fairly easy process that can be done by most homeowners. Step 1 of the window restoration process is choosing and preparing a workspace. To work on old windows, you're going to need an open and clutter-free work area. It is best to work outdoors or in a workshop separated from your home or living space in order to prevent dirt, dust, and debris from contaminating your home. Many old windows contain lead paint and other hazardous materials, so it is important to ensure that you are not contaminating your living or eating spaces. It is best to keep children, pets, and other household members away from your space as you are working. Once you have determined a workspace, you're going to want to prep it by putting down plastic sheeting or other washable or disposable fabrics to catch as much lead dust and paint chips as possible. This can be applied to the surface of the table or below on the floor. Having a shop vacuum with a HEPA, or a high-efficiency particulate air filter, is handy to vacuum up any loose dust or debris that may be contaminated with lead, and is especially important if working in an enclosed space. Another tool you will need for lead safety is a respirator with the proper filters to prevent inhaling lead dust. This is of the utmost importance when working with potentially hazardous materials. You will also need safety goggles or glasses to protect your eyes from any dust that will come off the window. It is also best to wear disposable gloves. Soho recommends looking up full lead safety measures to ensure that you are protecting yourself and your home. Once I have my workspace set up, I begin by placing the window on the table. I previously removed this window from its opening by using a screwdriver to gently unscrew the hinges. Once removed from its opening, I removed the hardware latch. At this point, you may want to take a photograph of the window to demonstrate its starting condition to compare to your finished work later. Step 2 of the process is prepping the window. This step is very important as you need to remove the old and crumbling materials to prepare it for new glazing, potential replacement glass, and paint. The tools that you will need for this part of the process are a scraper to scrape away paint and glazing putty, sandpaper of a couple different grits, a sanding block, and a brush to brush away dust that comes off the window. Begin by taking your scraper and slowly and gently prying away the loose glazing surrounding the panes of glass. The glazing on this window has broken down a lot, so much of it comes off with very little effort. When you are scraping away the old glazing and in contact with the glass, be sure to keep the long face of the scraper flat on the surface as much as possible and do not apply too much pressure. You do not want to scratch or break the glass during this process. I only use the pointed edges to pry away the upper part of the glazing that is adhered to the wood and avoid dragging it along the panes. While removing the glazing, you may notice that the glass is also held in place with small metal pieces around the edges called glazing points. These points come in a variety of shapes and sit on the surface of the glass to hold it in place via a point that is pushed into the thin wood mutton, which is the wood frame around each pane. These points can come loose over time and lose their grip in the wood. They may also get rusty or break down due to elemental exposure if the putty has fallen out in that area. If you encounter any glazing points that are loose or look to be in poor condition, you can gently pry those out with your scraping knife. Remove them by pushing on both sides of the point to slowly wiggle them out of the wood. Any that look in good condition and remain firmly in the wood can stay in place. For some paints, you may find that all of the glazing and points are easily removed, and there is nothing left holding the glass to the frame. In this case, reach under the opposite side or interior of the window and gently push upward on the pane of glass to remove it. Remember to use slight pressure and not force the glass, as this can cause it to break. Set aside any removed panes for now in a safe location. If you find that multiple panes of glass can be removed, label them with either a number or description to make it easier to replace them back in the same opening later. The glass panes and opening sizes are not always identical in historic windows, so labeling will help save you the time of having to match them up later in the process. It is important to note that during your window prep that you do not want to force any material off of the window that is in solid condition. Any glazing or paint that remains firmly adhered can be retained. This helps preserve the historic record of the window, including a record of the paint colors, and prevent over-restoring. While some people choose to bring windows back down to bare wood and remove all of the glazing and glass panes, Soho advises that the original and prior materials remain as intact as possible. However, there may be some circumstances where you do have to remove all of the old putty in a specific area. Circumstances include a broken pane of glass that will need to be replaced, that is stuck in the putty, or needing full access to the mutton, the wood divider between each pane, to make a repair. To remove solid putty, the best tool to use is a heat gun. A heat gun functions similarly to a hairdryer, only much hotter, and can be purchased at any big box home improvement store. You use the heat gun to remove old glazing by gently running it along the putty, holding it a few inches away. You want to keep the heat gun constantly in motion, as leaving it in one spot for too long can cause the wood to burn or the glass to break. This is a very typical way that people break glass while working on windows. After a few back and forths, the heat gun will soften the putty, at which point you can use your scraper to start removing it. It may take a few rounds of heating and scraping to get out all the old product, so remember not to force any materials off. At this point, I have removed all the loose putty and glazing points and set aside any removable panes. I stop to double check that all remaining material is stuck on well by gently going over it with my fingers. I move on to scraping the rest of the wood to remove loose paint. Once the loose paint has been scraped, I take a brief break to turn the window up and let all the loose materials fall off. I do a quick dusting of all the paints to get out any debris before I move on to sanding. For sanding, I begin with a thicker grit sandpaper of 60 or 80 and follow up with a finer grit of 180 or 200. The goal is to get all the surfaces as smooth as possible. To prevent any damage, be careful not to sand too harshly on areas with exposed or already damaged wood. Use your finer grit foam sanding block to get into the square corners of the muttons. You want to be careful to not scratch the glass during sanding, so be sure to avoid making contact with the surface and direct all your pressure towards the wood. Once you have finished sanding, take a pass over the window with your brush to remove the dust. If you have a shop vacuum with filters, you can use that as well. Once finished on the exterior, begin the process on the interior side of the window. This side will not have any putty or glazing points, but all the loose paint needs to be gently scraped off and sanded. After scraping and sanding the interior side and giving it another dusting, I take a glass scraper and go around gently scraping each glass pane along its edges where it meets the wood. This step is not 100% necessary, but the reason I do this is to remove any old paint that is still stuck on the glass and to get rid of the remaining putty residue to get it as clean as possible. This ensures that you have a nice smooth glass surface to reglaze and eventually paint with clean lines. Once again, you want to make sure to keep the blade flat on the glass to prevent scratching. Once you have done one side, flip it over to do the other. Be careful not to push too hard on the glass from the interior side, as it may flex more in the frame due to the removed putty and glazing points. Once finished, give it one last dusting or vacuuming. The next step in the process is wood repairs. These repairs will address common issues such as strip screw holes for hardware and fasteners, and wood rot and decay. At this point, you can temporarily move your window from your workspace and remove any plastic sheeting or materials used to catch your dust. Keep your respirator on and roll any materials up carefully to avoid pushing too much dust into the air. Give your table a dusting or vacuuming to try to remove most of the lead dust and paint. To give the window a buffer from my work table and hold down any residual dust, I put down an old sheet before bringing back my window. This is not necessary, but it can make it easier to clean your workstation and to catch any residual materials you will work with moving forward. Now that the window is back on the table and ready to be worked on again, you want to get out your products and tools for wood repair. I will use a variety of materials including epoxy, caulk, and wood glue. A couple of products that are very highly recommended for wood repair come in the wood restoration kit made by the company Abitron. This kit contains both a liquid and solid epoxy, ideal for solidifying and infilling damaged wood. These are all around fantastic products that are worth the investment for high quality wood repairs. The first is a liquid epoxy called Liquid Wood. This product is a penetrating epoxy wood consolidant used to structurally harden, regenerate, and waterproof decayed wood. The second is a solid epoxy called Wood Epox. It is a shrink-free epoxy putty used to fill, repair, and replace missing wood permanently. Once fully cured, the solid epoxy can be drilled, screwed, sanded, painted, and functions just like wood. In this tutorial, I am primarily going to be working with the solid epoxy. The majority of the damage on this window is split or missing chunks of wood, and the Wood Epox will provide a solid infill repair for these types of issues. The next product I have is Alex Plus Caulk, which is an acrylic latex caulk with silicone made by DAP. This product is great for sealing up small cracks to keep out moisture and fill in small gaps in the wood. The last product I have is some basic wood glue and some toothpicks. Moving on to the repairs, begin by taking an assessment of your window and see what work needs to be done. I use my hand to feel the pieces of wood to determine any loose joints or areas of rot. The exterior side of the window will typically have more damage than the interior, but this can vary depending on the overall conditions of where the window was located in a building. If you are first addressing areas of spongy wood and rot, you would begin by using liquid wood. Liquid wood is used by mixing equal parts A and B and brushing with a disposable chip brush or pouring the mix onto the damaged areas of the window. Be careful not to mix too much from the start to prevent wasting product. Once it has been fully absorbed by the wood, allow it to sit for the recommended amount of time to harden. This will vary depending on the temperature, humidity, and amount of product applied to the window. Once hardened, you can begin to work with your Wood Epox. This product contains a part A, which is a bright white color, and a part B, which is a light tan color. These two parts must be mixed in a 1-to-1 ratio in order to be effective and activate the hardening process. I begin by taking a small amount of part A and rolling it in my hands to make a ball, and then follow with part B. Start with small amounts of the product and try to make them as equal as possible. You can always mix more as needed, but if you mix too much and it is not used before it begins to harden, it will become useless. Once you have sized out your two parts, return the lids to the containers and set them aside. Begin by mixing the two portions together until they are fully combined. I like to fold the piece over on itself repeatedly until the two colors become one, mixing up to 1 minute long. Once mixed, the product has a working life of about 20 minutes before the hardening process begins. Apply the mixed epoxy to the wood by using your hands or a putty knife. Take off small chunks of the putty and push it down into the cracks and areas of damaged or missing wood. I prefer to use my fingers and smooth it later with a knife. It is best to build up layers of epoxy slowly and mix more product as you need it. Try to get the final top surface of the epoxy as smooth and flat as possible, even using a little bit of water on your putty knife to help smooth out the surface. This will help prevent further sanding later once it has hardened. This window has a significant split along the bottom rail, so I spend much of the time filling in that gap to re-solidify the piece. Something to note, if you have a large hole or chunk missing in a piece of wood, as large or larger than around the size of a golf ball, you can take a scrap piece of wood to fill in the hole, and then add the epoxy putty around it to fill in the gaps. This reduces the amount of product you need and is cost effective. Scrap wood and epoxy combine well to make a strong repair. Once you have filled in all the areas on one side of the window, you can flip it over and do the other, being careful not to mess up any product that you have already applied. This product will take a couple hours or more to fully harden, so be careful with disturbing what you have applied as you continue to work around your window. After the epoxy, I move on to caulking small cracks or separations in the joints of the wood. This product works well for sealing areas of the window that have good structural integrity but may have some gaps where moisture or insects can get in. You often find these cracks between the rails and the stiles of the window, or the sides and the top or bottom. Use the product by slowly squeezing out a thin layer over the crack that you are filling. Then, use a finger to smooth out the product and make sure all the little gaps are filled in. Be sure to wipe away any excess. Then, flip over the window and do the same thing on the other side. Now I am going to demonstrate how to fill in screw holes that have been stripped out and are no longer able to firmly grasp the fasteners. I am going to start by showing the toothpick method. This involves filling in the screw holes with toothpicks that are held together by wood glue. Begin by taking a small bundle of toothpicks and placing them in the hole. Visually measure out the rough height of the toothpicks needed for them to be as flush as possible with the surface of the rail. Once I estimate that height, I take the bundle out and set it down and begin trimming the toothpicks individually with a pair of scissors. I put a small amount of glue in the bottom of the hole for the toothpicks to grip into and start putting them in one by one. Keep doing this until the hole has been filled in as much as possible, and add some glue around them to help solidify everything together. This will take a bit to dry, but once solid, it can be sanded down flat. The wood of the toothpicks will be able to effectively grip a screw once you rehang the window or reinstall your hardware. The other method is to use the wood epoxy to fill the holes, similar to filling other parts of the window. When filling holes with epoxy, you can use a toothpick or other long and narrow tool to push the product further down in the opening. Once all of your wood repairs are completed, it is best to take a break to let all of your materials fully cure and harden. The epoxy will take up to 1 to 2 hours to fully harden, but this varies greatly depending on humidity levels and thickness of the product you applied. I prefer to let everything dry overnight in a clean and dry place where it will not be disturbed. When you are ready to start again, the next step is to sand smooth all of the hardened wood repair products. Make sure to wear your respirator and safety glasses for this portion, as more dust will be released. To sand the wood epoxy, begin with a tougher grit sandpaper to take off any higher areas of buildup, and follow up with a finer grit. The goal is to get the epoxy as flush with the wood surface as possible. If you take the time to do it right, once the window is repainted, you will never be able to tell the difference between the natural wood and the filled-in areas. Make sure to sand down any toothpicks as well for a clean finish. Once you have finished sanding, take a brush or vacuum and clean the window off as much as possible. At this point, there are just a few more steps before beginning the process of reglazing. I remove the window from the table and remove the sheet, as I do not want anything dusty around the window once I start glazing. An important step in the window restoration process is replacing broken panes of glass. While scraping and sanding your window, you may have removed pieces of glass that were already broken, or even broke them during the process, so you're going to need to know how to cut new pieces for replacement. Let's take a moment to go over how this is done. For old windows, pane sizes are not typically standardized and can be highly inconsistent. So for a glass pane replacement, you will likely need to take a larger piece of glass and cut it down into a smaller one. The tools that you will need for this process include a glass cutter, a straight edge ruler to guide your line, a Sharpie or something to mark your dimensions, and glass cutting oil to oil your cutter. The first step in the process is to find a piece of glass that you can cut from for your new pane. Scrap historic wavy glass can often be found at architectural salvage stores or can even be sourced from retailers online. Begin by measuring your opening as precisely as possible. Remember that the openings may not be perfectly square, so be sure to measure across from multiple points. You want the glass to fit snugly in the opening, hugged closely by those wood edges. However, if the opening does not have square corners, you can shorten your measurements by a couple millimeters in either direction to account for this. Remember to measure twice and cut once. Once you have your measurements, mark those on the piece of glass. Take your straight edge ruler and lay it down, connecting your measurement points. The wheel on a glass cutter is in the center of the head, so you want to move over the ruler just a tiny bit on the outside of your line to accommodate where the blade will actually meet the glass. Once you're lined up, hold the ruler down firmly and securely grip your cutter. Push down into the glass with firm and steady pressure, and slowly but consistently pull it back towards your body. It should sound like a scraping or scratching noise on the surface of the glass. Only make one pass. Now you can see the score line that has been made in the pane that will allow you to make a clean break. Move the glass to the side of a table and align the score line up with the edge. Use one hand to hold the glass in place and the other to grip the opposite side's edge. In one motion, firmly push down on the hovering part of the pane, and it should snap easily right along your line. Repeat the exact same process on the other side to cut your second measurement. Once you have done this, if you measured correctly, everything should fit well into place. For reglazing the window, you are going to need glazing putty. There are many different brands of this and opinions on which is best, but here I am using DAP 33, which is a widely available, cost-effective option that is very easy to find and purchase. It is mixed and ready to go right out of the container. You are also going to need your putty knife and any panes of glass that you removed from the window or cut for replacement. Putty knife choice is a highly personal selection, and many people base their choice on flexibility, angle, and length of the knife. I am also going to keep my glass scraper on hand to clean up the edges and corners of my glazing. Lastly, I have new glazing points to replace the missing ones. Begin the reglazing process by reinserting any glass panes that may have been removed into their openings to make sure that they fit properly. Also insert any new glass panes that you have just cut. This is when those labels that you made earlier really come in handy. You want the best fit as possible, so you may have to reorient the glass a couple of times until it sits correctly. Once you are assured that they are all in the right spot and orientation, remove them one by one to give them a cleaning. If the panes were removed during the scraping process, they likely still have old paint and putty residue on the surface. I scrape each piece with a glass scraper and make sure once again to keep it flat on the glass. I do all sides and the front and the back of each pane. After I finish scraping, I take some glass cleaner to wipe down the pane and remove any dust and dirt. Next, I am going to begin a process known as bedding the glass. This is what will create a seal between the replaced glass pane and the thin wood edge it rests upon, called the rabbet. To do this, start by focusing on one pane of glass and remove it from its opening. Take some of your window glazing putty and begin working it in your hands to get it warm and flexible. Once I have done this for about 30 seconds or so, I begin applying it to the wooden rabbet edge. The goal is to get a layer of putty on the rabbet that will form a seal between it and the glass. It can be tricky to get the putty to stick to the wood, but try to make sure all of the edges are covered. Once fully covered, it is time to replace the glass in the opening. Pick up the pane in the orientation that it was removed and gently set it down into the opening before pushing it down with even pressure into the putty. I run my fingers along each edge to get the glass as close down to the rabbet as possible, squeezing out any extra putty below. I'm careful not to push too close to the center of the pane, as that could cause it to break. Once the putty is pushed down, as close to the rabbet as it can get, I take a quick look to make sure that there is putty under all 4 edges of the glass. If not, you're going to want to go back to make sure to infill those areas to create a full seal. Then I take my putty knife and scrape out all the excess putty on this exterior side to make way for inserting the glazing points. The glazing points are inserted via use of your putty knife, pushing it into the mutton edge roughly in the center of each side. Place the point down flat on the glass and use the top edge of your knife against the upturned, tooth-like edge of the point to push it into the wood. Use firm pressure and wiggle it slightly if you have to. Make sure to push towards the wood and not down on the pane of glass. Repeat on all 4 sides anywhere that there is a glazing point missing. Repeat the same process with all other reinstalled or replacement glass panes. Once they have all been bedded and secured, flip over the window to scrape away the extra putty that was pushed out when you set each piece. You want to make sure not to scrape out any putty that is helping to create that seal, so a good technique is to take the edge of your knife and very gently pull away the remaining putty. Once I have bed all of the replacement or reinstalled glass panes into the window, I'm going to take the glazing points and begin inserting those on any of the 4 sides of each pane where they are missing. Remember that there are going to be the remaining older ones that were sturdy enough to retain, so you can skip over those sides. I take my putty knife and situate the glazing point against the mutton, roughly in the center, and push in the points. Be careful not to reinsert the glazing points into the old point holes, especially if that spot is worn out and does not allow the point to get a tight grip into the wood. These panes of glass are roughly around 6 by 10 inches, but if your glass is much bigger, or you reglazing a large single pane of glass, you will want to insert more glazing points along each side. A general guideline is 1 point every 10 to 12 inches. The next step is new glazing putty. To begin, grab a handful of putty and warm it up as you did before by working it in your hands. The first step is to get the glazing putty in the space between the mutton and the glass surface. One technique is the same as I did for bedding the glass, where I use my palm to hold the putty and fed it to my thumb, which pushes against the wood edge. This wedges the putty into the space and it helps get a seal on the top line against the wood. A secondary technique is to roll the putty between your hands to form a long, snake-like piece that you can lay on the glass against the mutton. A third technique that is similar to the first is to take the putty in your fingers and hold it against the mutton, and with a perpendicularly positioned putty knife, pull the blade back towards the edge to cut off chunks of putty. In this technique, the knife is doing the work your thumb did in the first one, and it also helps create a seal on the upper edge, which I find makes it easier to glaze. To begin smoothing out the putty, I hold the putty knife handle in my dominant hand and place the fingers of my other hand on the upper half of the blade. The goal with smoothing the putty is to position the blade at an angle that connects the top edge of the mutton to just closely inside the edge of the rabbet that is on the other side of the glass. Getting this alignment correct is very important, as if you go over the rabbet edge, the putty will be visible from the inside of the window. You want this line to be back a couple of millimeters from the rabbet edge in order to leave room for a very thin line of paint, which will happen later. You can see that the old glazing putty left on this window offers an example of the angle we are going for. Start by referencing the pane immediately adjacent to the one you are working on to gauge where to position your knife. Once you have that line, push down into the putty with one edge on the glass and the other angled onto the wood edge. Start pulling back slowly in a controlled and consistent motion. While dragging the knife, you want to keep a firm grip, consistent pressure, and a steady angle. I find that it is best to do the entire side in one long pull to get the smoothest and most consistent result. When you get towards the end, curve the knife upward in a sharp angle to help create the shape of a corner. Let's view this process again from another angle on a different pane. Start by placing the putty along the mutton using your preferred method. Take your putty knife, lining it up with the rabbit edge on the next pane. Place it in the putty on your line, push down firmly, and pull back in one smooth motion, pulling upward at the end. Once you make your first initial pass, clear away all the excess putty by carefully pulling it using the knife. You'll do this along the glass edge and also along the wooden edge. Be careful not to mess up the work that you just did and move carefully. Gather up all your extra putty in a ball to continue using it as you work around the pane. Once the excess is cleared away, take your finger and reach around to the opposite side of the glass to check to see how close your line is to the rabbit edge. Again, you want to be able to see a tiny 2 mm wood edge just over your putty line. If it is too far over, you can do more passes to shave off a little bit at a time. If it is too far back, you can add more putty and go over it again to extend out the line. Once you have it just right, go back in with your knife to smooth out any bumps or inconsistencies. Take extra time and care to carve out the corners to a sharp 45-degree angle. I find it easier to wait until both sides have putty to shape that corner, but in the meantime, make sure to get a nice straight line while working on the first side. The process may not be quick, but you will get faster and better over time. As I mentioned earlier, this window still has a decent amount of intact solid glazing putty. When you encounter these areas, the process is virtually the same, but just using the putty to infill the missing pieces. You want to get as seamless a finish as possible, so once it is painted, you will never notice the difference. So make sure to get in all the little cracks and openings and create a smooth line. I regularly use my glass scraper to fix any small issues with my putty. It has a more precise edge and can be used for more refined adjustments. I am going to go around this window and glaze each of the 4 sides of every pane. Remember to step back every once in a while to see your work from a distance and catch any areas that still need touch-ups, and continually use your fingers to reach around to the other side of the window and make sure that your lines do not go over the rabbit edge. Once you are satisfied with your work, turn the window over for a final inspection of your new glazing. Imagine you are standing in the interior of a room looking out the window. You want to make sure that you do not see any putty that extends past the wood edges. If you do, make sure to take the time to go back and fix those spots until everything looks right. Taking the time to fine-tune your work will result in a more professional finished look. From here, take the window and find somewhere comfortable to give it a very gentle brush down with a chip paintbrush. Focus on the middle of the glass panes and the wooden sides, where tiny putty scraps may have collected. If running the brush over or close to the putty, be sure to use extremely light pressure or else you risk ruining your work. Now, I am officially finished reglazing this window. Depending on the putty brand used, a window will take anywhere from 5 to 15 days to fully cure, or even longer in very humid environments. If you live in a relatively sunny and dry place like San Diego, you can reinstall your window for the time being and let it cure in place. Otherwise, you can find an average temperature dry storage area for your putty to harden up. Keep it away from the rain, snow, and extreme temperatures as much as possible. The goal is for your outer layer of putty to get a nice skin on it that is solid enough to put on a layer of paint. Check your glazing periodically for that skin by gently touching it with your finger. It will feel firm and dry as opposed to the soft and moist condition you felt while working with it. After a week or so, once the putty feels hard to the touch, it is ready to be primed and painted. Thank you for watching Save Our Heritage Organization's tutorial video for how to restore wood windows. Please check out our other videos and stay tuned for new tutorials of historic homeowner do-it-yourself restoration projects. To learn more about Soho, our work, and to become a member, please visit sohosandiego.org.